I'd like to welcome everybody and just remind you that this is both broadcasting live and being recorded. So if you don't wish to appear, please switch off your video. And welcome also to everybody on YouTube. Ton, would you like to make the introductions?
Welcome everyone, and welcome to Carla Vieira, who will speak tonight to us. I wish to thank everybody for coming, and especially our patrons, without whom we would not be able to have these meetings. If you like, you can become a patron yourself and support our work. Our speaker tonight, Carla, is a researcher at the new University of Lisbon. She is also attached to the Centre Alberto Benveniste, which is a society in Lisbon which is mainly concerned with Sephardic research. And she is also an editor of the Cadernos Estudos Sepharditas, a leading journal about Sephardic history. And her current project is bridging the worlds of Portugal and London, and it's called Nation Between Empires. It concentrates on the first half of the 18th century, which to me is very interesting because the 18th century is a much neglected time period in Sephardic research in academia. And I'm happy that someone is taking the lead on this. I welcome Carla and I give the word to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ton. I'd like to thank you, Ton, and David for the opportunity to present my work, the work that I've been developed over the last few years. I'll share the screen with you. Okay, now. And now I will share with you a little of the results of this work that I've been developed. First of all, I would like to apologize for my broken English. If you don't understand something, please let me know. Okay. First of all, I would like to show you this graph. This graph is a survey that I have made about the trials of the Inquisition of Lisbon that were moved against new Christians in the first half of the 18th century. Here you have you can see that there was 3 peaks in this repression, inquisitorial repression against the new Christians in Lisbon. You have here in the beginning of the 18th century, in 1776, you have here a peak. Then another wave of prisons in the second decade of the 18th century, and then in the 1720s, another little wave of prisons by the Inquisition of Lisbon. Portugal had 3 Inquisition tribunals, Coimbra, Lisbon and Évora. These numbers are related to the Court of Lisbon. And this survey make me to identify three waves of prisons in the Inquisition of Lisbon during the first half of the 18th century. The first wave happened in the first years of the 18th century, and had the community, the new Christian community of Lisbon, as the main target of this repression of the Inquisition. I have studied and analyzed a survey of Inquisition trials for this period, and I have identified the source of these prisons in two families, the Laguna family, and in the case of the merchant that was arrested by the Inquisition, José Nunes Chaves. Both lived in a street in Lisbon, Rua das Mudas, and this is very interesting because this wave of prisons happened in the beginning of the 18th century after some denunciations of a servant of the Laguna family who denounced some Jewish rituals that the family kept in its house in Lisbon, and this motivated the flight of some members of this family, namely Leonor da Fonseca, who was the widow of Francisco Lopes Laguna, and her children. They moved in their flight in the 19th of July of 1700 to Amsterdam. After this escape, there was another prison in the 25th of September of 1702. José Nunes Chaves, a merchant that have business in the Atlantic trade, presented before the Inquisition and the Inquisition of Lisbon, and then he denounced several new Christians, mainly businessmen and merchants of Lisbon, and this motivated a wave of prisons in the city. Also, months after, three daughters of Francisco Lopes Laguna, you have here Ana Branca and Violante Henriques, were also arrested by the Inquisition, and this was the source of this wave of prisons. That was the biggest wave of prisons in the 18th century in Lisbon. More than 218 new Christians were arrested between 1702 and 1706, with a peak in 1703, when about 100 prisons occurred in Lisbon, in the Inquisition of Lisbon. This motivated also some attempts to escape, to flight, namely some of them, this attempted escaping was detected by the Inquisition, and the fugitives were arrested. It was the case of the attempt by Graça Henriques and Gabriel Lopes Pinheiro, who were arrested in 25th of December of 1702. This was a severe blow on the Lisbon's new Christian mercantile elite, and motivated another wave of prisons about some years after, and this happened after the prison of this merchant, Gabriel Lopes Pinheiro, who denounced a partner, or a business partner, Francisco Gomes da Silva. Francisco Gomes da Silva was agent of his father, José Gomes da Silva, senhor de engenho, a sugar mill lord, producer of sugar in Rio de Janeiro, and Francisco Gomes da Silva was his agent in Lisbon. So he presented before the Inquisition and denounced some new Christians, namely one of them, was Inácio Correia da Silva. When Inácio Correia da Silva was arrested in 1705, was married to Catarina Soares Brandoa. Catarina Soares Brandoa had lived some time in Rio de Janeiro and was acquainted with Francisco Gomes da Silva family. She presented before the Inquisition of Lisbon in 15th of May of 1706, in the consequence of the prison of her husband, Inácio Correia da Silva, and she told to the Inquisitors her experience in a marriage of José Gomes da Silva daughter in Rio de Janeiro, where the guests of this marriage had professed some Jewish rituals during the ceremony. So Catarina Soares Brandoa ended up denouncing all the guests of this marriage. The result was 169 new Christians that were denounced by Catarina Soares Brandoa, all of them from Rio de Janeiro. This is why this wave of prisons is, I have named it as a Brazilian wave, because most of the new Christians who were arrested were from Rio de Janeiro. The first prisons in Rio de Janeiro happened in 1710, but in 1711, because of the French attack to Rio de Janeiro, the shipping of the prisoners to Lisbon was delayed, so they only arrived at Lisbon in 1712. Then in the Auto de Fé on 9 of July of 1713, from 141 convicts, 72 were from Rio de Janeiro. This shows how this wave of prisons were so focused on this community, on this new Christian community of the Rio de Janeiro. Until 1717, the number of convicts from Rio de Janeiro continued to be high in the Autos da Fé. You have here the process of Catarina Soares Brandoa. Then the third wave of prisons in the 1720s was more dispersed. I have identified several focus of dissemination of denouncers and of denunciations, and this motivated also a dispersion of the Inquisition repression in the Portuguese territory. I have here three examples of trials that had motivated a wave of prisons in different localities in Portugal. We have here the Francisco Gabriel Ferreira, a merchant of Porto, that had been arrested on April of 1725. He was denounced by a servant that testified that in his house the family, Francisco Gabriel Ferreira's family, didn't eat porco and sarrabulho. Sarrabulho is a traditional Portuguese dish made with pork blood, okay, and other rituals and other behaviors that made her suspect that they had this Jewish Jewish motivation to make these rituals. And this prison of Francisco Gabriel Ferreira had high impact in Porto, where he lived, but also in Lisbon and in the Douro region in the interior of Portugal, because he have several trade connections with merchants and other people in these places. Other source of the dissemination of denunciations was the prison of Manuel Lopes Alves, also a merchant from Lisbon, and he was arrested in 1725. He was also denounced by a servant who found a prayer book with Jewish prayers in his house, and she delivered this book to her confessor, who delivered it to the Inquisition of Lisbon. The trial of Manuel Lopes Alves had this prayer book annexed to the trial. You have here one of its pages. And this prison, he ended up denouncing several new Christians from Lisbon, but also from Covilhã, Lurico, and Guarda, because his family was from these localities. Another source of denunciations that motivated this wave of prisons in the 1720s begin with a presentation before the Inquisition of Lisbon of Luís Terra Soares e Barbuda. Luís Terra Soares e Barbuda was not a new Christian, was an old Christian, but he was fiancé of a new Christian girl that was from a Brazilian family that had moved to Lisbon 1 decade before, in the sequence of the wave of prisons in 1711, 1712, the Coutinho family, and he presented before the Inquisition and announced that her fiancé and her family also kept some Jewish rituals, and this provoked this wave of detentions among this family, Coutinho family, and other new Christians from Rio de Janeiro that were at the moment living in Lisbon. One characteristic of these three waves of prisons was the high incidence in the mercantile elite of Lisbon. We have here a graph with a percentage that I have calculated from the merchants and businessmen that are present in the lists of autos de fé from 1703 to 1741. This is as you can see, here mercadores, merchants. I include all new Christians who have professions that were related to trades, mercadores, tendeiros, and other designations that appear in the list of autos de fé. As you can see, you have a high incidence in the beginning of the 18th century, but also in the third wave of prisons in the 1920s. In the auto de fé of 1728, you have almost 80% of the convicts that were sentenced or new Christians with professions related to trade. And here in red, we have the elite, the homens de negócio, the businessmen, the contractors, who also represent a high percentage of the convicts that were sentenced in these lists of autos de fé, mainly in the first wave of prisons in the beginning of the 18th century. These lists also reveal that some of these prisoners of these convicts were indicated as introduced as Castilians, as Spanish. And it's interesting because Michael Gedge, in his polemical work, A View of the Court of the Inquisition in Portugal, he mentions this fact: the Portuguese inquisitors to be revenged on the Castilians for calling their countrymen Jews, among other opprobrious names, wherever they can have the least color for it, do never fail in their printed lists of acts of faith to put down their Jewish prisoners, Castilians, as this prisoner is here said to have been originally, who was born and had lived all his days in the city of Lisbon. Gedge is approaching a question that is not so exaggerated how we want to show in this extract, but it's the fact that there are some Portuguese that are introduced in the list of autos de fé as Spanish, but these Portuguese are new Christians that had lived for several years in Spain. The fact is that there was a high mobility between both sides of the frontier between Portugal and Spain, and this is quite normal to have these Portuguese who had lived several years in Spanish, and when they returned to Portugal, they are introduced in the Inquisition as Spanish, as Castilians. Also, there is another fact that Lisbon had become an important point of escape in the Iberian Peninsula. So some Spanish New Christians who had the intention to escape from the Inquisitorial repression choose Lisbon as the port to go away to flee from the Iberian Peninsula. This is the reason why, when we look to the records of the congregation of London, we found so many Portuguese, so many Jews named as Vindos de Portugal. Some of these Vindos de Portugal were Spanish, but they are called Vindos de Portugal because they departed from Lisbon. And this is the reason why they were called Vindos de Portugal. Also, this means coming from Portugal. Okay, now we will analyze a little the context in which this migration movement happened, this migration movement from Portugal to England. The fact is that since the middle of the 17th century, Portugal and England had strengthened their diplomatic and economic relations, namely through a series of treaties, namely in the 1642, the Treaty of Peace and Trade, then in 1654, and then in the 1703, the Treaty of Trade, known as the Midwin Treaty, that that boosted the trade relations between Portugal and England at the moment that the Brazilian sugar and the Brazilian gold were quite important to give vitality for these trade relations between Portugal and England. For English merchants, Lisbon was a hub of trading routes to the Mediterranean and American colonies. And this is the reason why so many English vessels were docked in Lisbon at this time. This increase of English vessels influx in Portuguese ports, namely in Lisbon. So these English ships became also the vehicle of for escaping, for these New Christians escaping from Portugal. I have identified two moments of this migratory movement. One in the early 70s, at the beginning of the 18th century, and the other in the mid 1720s. This first moment was directly motivated by the wave of prisons in the beginning of the century, And we have some pieces of evidence in Inquisition's trials, namely some reports of failed attempts of evade that are included in the accusation of some New Christians who were arrested by the Inquisition. And this first moment, this first migratory moment have many destinations, not only London, but also Amsterdam, Italian cities, France, and so on. The other greatest moment of this migratory movement is in the mid-20s, and this was the greatest migratory influx that have no precedent. It was motivated by a new wave of prisons, of course, in the third wave of prisons in the 18th century, but part of these fugitives had been already arrested by the Inquisition at the beginning of the century, and now in the 20s, when this repressive movement increases, they feared that a new inquisitorial trial, so they decided to escape. Then the main destination was London. And we can find some evidence of this movement in various kind of documentary sources in the Inquisition trials, namely in the accusations, in the genealogy sessions, in the confession also, but also in the trials of attorneys. This means that those New Christians who had moved from Portugal to the so-called terras de tolerância, lands of tolerance. This means London, Amsterdam, Hamburg, and then some years after they returned to Portugal. And when they returned to Portugal, they decided that they had to present themselves before the Inquisition, and then they told all their histories of religious drift and tried to find the pardon of the tribunal. And these trials of attorneys are very, very, very rich in information about these migratory movements. We have also in the Tribunal Santo Ofício funds two types of documentation that are very rich also in this kind of information, the Cadernos das Ordens do Conselho Geral and the Cadernos do Promotor. These documents are not quite organized. They are kind of miscellaneous of documents from the Conselho Geral and from other segments of the Inquisition, but they have a lot of information, and information that we don't find in the trials. Another important source is the diplomatic correspondence, both by British agents in Lisbon and Portuguese agents in London. The correspondence of British agents in Lisbon, we can find it in the National Archives, in the State Papers funds, and the Portuguese agents in London, the documentation is quite scattered. There are some books that are in the Arquivo Nacional da Torre do Tombo, others in the Biblioteca Nacional, and other ones in Academia das Ciências, de Lisboa. Now I have here some examples of this kind of documentation. This is from an Inquisition trial of Afonso Fernandes Rombo, who was a Spanish New Christian, who was a kind of smuggler of persons in this movement. He paid the travel expenses and the bribe to the captains and the masters of the English vessels to transport these new Christians to England. And here we have an excerpt of his confession. 20 years ago, he, Afonso Fernandes Rome, decided to leave this kingdom and go to London to profess the law of Moses more freely. With this aim, he entered the house of a French woman who had a beverage store in the street from Corpo Santo do Remoacho in Lisbon. And there he saw an Englishman who said that he was Captain Kerr. Afonso asked him if he could ship a passenger to England, and Kerr told him that he could ship not only one, but even 14 passengers. And his trial continue with this kind of information. Here in the Cadernos das Ordens do Conselho Geral, the book 155 of the Tribunal Santo Ofício fonts, we have a list of persons that of people that were arrested together with this Afonso Fernandes Rome. They were accused of trying to escape from Portugal, and this list is quite interesting. We have here several individuals that are presented as Spanish. For example, this João Afonso, alias Afonso Fernandes, a new Christian merchant, single from Seville in Castile, in Spain, and resident in this city, Lisbon. And you have here a lot of other new Christians who were arrested in 1727 when they tried to escape to England. By analyzing this documentation, you can design a kind of methodology of escape that were used by these new Christians. First of all, most of them had contact with their relatives or friends that were already in the intended destination, London, Amsterdam, and sent money for them. It was an important step to provide conditions to construct their lives when in the destination. Then find escape vehicle. In most of the cases was English vessel. Then pay the passage and bribe the captain or the master. Sell their assets and collect debts to get their money to escape and also to pay the travel expenses. And most important, avoid unwanted attentions and choose the ideal timing to escape. These first four steps are very risky, and some of new Christians were arrested by the Inquisition because they raised some suspects because of this kind of actions. For example, we have here another document, very interesting document, that is a list of Portuguese new Christians who kept correspondence with Jews in London. This list was given by a Spanish who lived in London, Dom Alonso, to a Portuguese merchant, João Gonçalves, and this João Gonçalves delivered this list to the Inquisition of Lisbon in 1725. And we have here some of these new Christians, and namely one of them, Diego José Ramos, that is presented here as a Spanish from Asuna, administrator of the tobacco contract in Algarve, in the south of Portugal. He had a son, a sister, and 3 nephews of him had arrived at this city, London, and they were Jews. Diogo José Ramos sent them a bill with the value of 10,000 cruzados. They are expecting him in the city, and he writes to them every month. This is very interesting because Diego José Ramos was the father of Aaron Lopes, the well-known merchant that went to Newport and became a really, really important businessman in colonial America. There are some evidence from the Shahar Hashamayim congregation records that will reveal the impact of this migratory movement from Portugal to England. Some of them had been already studied by Richard Barnett and A.S. Diamond and other authors. For example, here are the number of ketubot celebrated in the Shahar Hashamayim during the first decades of the 18th century, and we can find here a peak in the same years of the third wave of presence in Lisbon. We have here in gray is those ketubot whose grooms are introduced as Vindos de Portugal, coming from Portugal, and in red we have the total number of ketubots. The same happens with the circumcision records. We have here also a peak in the 1720s. It's very clear here. And also with the data on the expenses of the congregation with poor people. We have here 4 kinds of assistance that were provided by the congregation to poor people. The help to pobres da terra, the local poors, the poors who lived in London, in the community of London, the pobres forasteiros, the foreigner poors, the alugueres, the rental, the assistance to rentals of houses, and the fretes, the payment of travel expenses to the newcomers. And we find here also a peak in 1726. Based on these numbers, A.S. Diamond had calculated that about 1,500 Portuguese exiles had arrived at London between 1720 and 1733. Richard Barnett think that this number was under evaluated, and probably about 3,000 of Portuguese exiles had arrived at London during all the 18th century. This was a great migratory wave that caused high pressure in the congregation charity structures and the need for form these structures. Julia Lieberman had studied this problematic very well in several studies. Here it's one of them, published in the journal Ler História. But this migratory movement did not have impact in long term, because at the end of the 18th century, according to Diamond's estimate, the Sephardim in London were about 2,000. Why this discrepancy, this difference between the high numbers of newcomers and those who stayed in London and became part of the Jewish community of London? There are some hypotheses that had been raised by the historiography, namely the several incentives that the Congregation of London had provided to the newcomers to immigrate to British colonies in North America and Caribbeans. Also, London was a transit point to other destinations as Amsterdam, southwestern France, Italian cities. Another factor was the high mortality rates among the newcomers, and also the high rates of those newcomers who ended up converting to Christianity. Over the last few years, I have working in trying to identify the paths and route of these Portuguese Jewish exiles in London, and I am now presenting you some tips, some suggestions of how to work with this kind of information. First of all, it was the most simple thing to do is to search the wheels of these Portuguese shoes, because some of these wheels include the Christian name of the testator. For example, we have here the example of the wheel of Abraham Gomes de Carvalho, and here otherwise John Gomes de Carvalho. He was João Gomes de Carvalho in Portugal, and this information is included in the will. Also, in the will, you can find some family connections that could be useful to construct its genealogy, and in some cases also mentions to family in Portugal, some relatives who are named as also to who also have contemplated by the testator in his will. These wills could be found in the National Archives, and it's quite easy to search this documentation. Also, the congregational records that you should know very well, namely the circumcision registers, the ketubot records, and burial records that are elements essential to track the route of these newcomers, Portuguese newcomers. A very interesting source is the list of fintados. Finta was a tax based on the members' wealth that was paid by ever members that have economic conditions to do it, and the reference to new fintados, to new members that paid the finta, also includes the newcomers. So we can find when these Portuguese Jews became part of the community of London. Also, these records are very interesting because also give an idea on the economic situation of the newcomers, in general of the members who paid the finta. For example, we have here a list of all the Yehidim of the Congregation of London that paid the finta in 15 Elul 5493. For example, Abraham Lopes de Brito, and here you have the value, the amount of finta that this Abraham Lopes de Brito paid to the congregation. Also, the Inquisition trials, that are another important source to track these routes, namely the sessions of genealogy in the trials. It's important to search also the different trials of the different relatives that are arrested and persecuted in different times. This makes possible to track the family's evolution and mobility, and take attention to those who are mentioned as ausentes, absents. This means that were not already in Portugal. And also take attention to omissions, some members of the family that are not mentioned by the defendant in this genealogy session in the Inquisition. We have here the example of the trial of Fernando Dias Fernandes. We have other sources, parish records, diplomatic correspondence, the denization records, Bank of England stockholders records, pleadings and litigations, land tax records. All these kind of sources are important to know the origins and maybe try to identify who were these Portuguese Jews before arrive London and during their time in London. Finally, I would like to show you an example. This was a research that I have done some years ago. It was one of the first research questions that I have endeavored on this problematic of the diaspora to England. It was a research that allowed me to identify who was Abraham Mendes Seixas before arrived at London. And now I will show you how I could identify who was Abraham Mendes Seixas. First of all, I have begun with the will, his will in 6th of March of 1738. In this will, we find here his name, Abraham Mendes Seixas, otherwise Miguel Pacheco de Silva. This is fake evidence because Miguel Pacheco da Silva was not indeed his Christian name, his name in Portugal. Miguel Pacheco da Silva was the name that he used in the business that he kept with Portugal after he had left the country. Here in the will, he mentioned 3 children, Rebecca and Judith Mendes Seixas, married to Daniel Mendes Seixas and Rodrigo Pacheco, and a son, Isaac Mendes Seixas. In the congregation records, you can find a lot of information of the first actions that he had when he entered to the Jewish community of London. The circumcision in February 25, the ketubot in March 28, and here we have the first mention to the payment of the finta on April 12. We have here the extract of the minutes of the Muhammad minutes. This is em dito dia 8, in the day 8, the junta decided to fintar to the following men. Abraham Mendes Seixas, who paid £6 per annum by year, and Mose Haim Jacob Gomes Serra, £2. Then I crossed this information with the information that I have collected in the Inquisition records. There were several members of the Mendes Seixas family that were arrested since the beginning of the 18th century and during the 3 waves of prisons that I have identified before. This family are from Beiras, from Celurico da Beira, Guarda, and Covilhã. These are 3 localities in the interior of Portugal. And then I will try to find information about the members of this family who had left Portugal about 1725. That was the year in which we have information about Abraham Mendes Seixas, the first informations about Abraham Mendes Seixas in London. And I have found this trial of Rafael Mendes Furtado. He was a relative that told that his aunt Beatriz Mendes was married to António Mendes Seixas, a new Christian, who had been a cientista, and she had 2 daughters named Ana and Rosa, and a son named Rafael, new Christians, singles, and absent with their parents. but he does not know where they had gone. He has only heard that it was outside Portugal. This information was very important and make me to focus this character, António Mendes Seixas. Who was this António Mendes Seixas? Okay, António Mendes Seixas had been arrested by the Inquisition in 1703. We have here the trial, image of a picture of the trial. Then after this trial, he returned to Celurico da Beira and married his cousin Beatriz Mendes da Silva. The couple moved from Celurico to Lisbon about 1709, and they lived in the Rua da Tarouca, a street in the parish of Santa Justa in Lisbon from 1709 to about 1724. I found this information in another documentation, the Rois de Confessados. The Rois de Confessados is a list of people that confessed, that had the sacrament of confession. And this information is this documentation is very interesting because these lists have the names of all the members of the households in a parish, in this case, or in the parish of Santa Justa. And we can find the family, the servants, the slaves in the household. And after searching for Mendes Seixas in the Rois de Confessados, I have found that the family was in this street, Rua da Tarouca, during these years. But after 1724, we lost the reference to them. At this time, António and Beatriz had 3 children, Anda, Rosa, and Rafael. So there are a lot of evidence that Abraham Mendes Seixas and António Mendes Seixas was the same man. But there was evidence that confirmed this hypothesis. It was mentioned in an excerpt in the letter written by Rebecca Mendes Seixas, Abraham Mendes Seixas' daughter, to her brother Isaac Mendes Seixas, in which she informed him about the death of our brother Pedro, of their brother Pedro. The interesting is that Pedro is not mentioned in the will of Abraham Mendes Seixas. So this is quite intriguing. And this information that he had died in the 4th of January. In fact, Pedro was not son of António Mendes Seixas, of Abraham Mendes Seixas, but he was the son of Beatriz Mendes Seixas, his wife. Beatriz Mendes Seixas had 2 children from her first marriage, Pedro Vaz da Silva and Leonor Mendes. And Pedro Vaz da Silva presented before the Inquisition of Coimbra in 1705, and he only moved to London in 1747. This means several years after the death of his stepfather. And he was buried on the 5th of January of 1772. So this Pedro Vaz da Silva was the brother Pedro that was mentioned in the letter of Rebecca Mendes Seixas. And this is the last evidence that I have collected that permit me to confirm that Abraham Mendes Seixas and António Mendes Seixas was the same man. So it's all. Thank you. I'd like to thank you your patience and.
Thank you. That was absolutely incredible. There was so many. No, seriously, there were so many sort of sources that I was unaware of. It was quite brilliant. Can I first of all ask what do you think was motivating the Inquisition, I mean, obviously there's lots of different theories, but what was causing these sort of localized persecutions in Lisbon and Brazil and elsewhere?
This is it's not an easy question because, as you have said, there is a lot of theories. And the economic reason is the most popular theory that have written in the historiography. And the question is that the Inquisition is an institution that lasted for several years. So it's an institution that changed a lot along the history. So I think that the motivations also changed a lot. In this case, in this presence in the 18th century, it's the fact that it was the Jewish elite, the New Christian elite, New Christian mercantile elite was the main target of the Inquisition. This is quite evident, in particular in the first years of the 18th century. So maybe economic reasons could be could be the motivation. I don't know.
Thank you, Ton.
How many of the sources that you mentioned in Portugal are online?
Online. The Inquisition trials are all online.
Mm-hmm.
The Cadernos do Promotor, all the documentation of Inquisition of Lisbon, trials, Cadernos do Promotor, Cadernos das Ordens do Conselho Geral, are all online. And it's easy to search for this information.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned parish registers. Are they all online also?
Some of them are.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are online. Maybe most of them are online. Documentation that I have mentioned, the Rois de Confessados of the parish of Santa Justa, is not online. Unfortunately, it's not online. It's in the Arquivo do Patriarcado de Lisboa, the Patriarchate of Lisbon archive. And
and I noticed that some of these date back from before the earthquake of 1755. So they survived. So
this survived. This documentation of Santa Justa parish survived, but there are several documentation of other parish in Lisbon that did not survive. It's a pity, but
yeah, it's a pity. Yeah. That's all the Jews who left for England go to London, or did they also go to other places? Have you found any other place names in England mentioned in the Inquisition files?
Actually, I didn't find this.
Okay.
This wave of this migratory wave was quite focused in London. I didn't find information about other localities or other locations in England.
David Simon says hello. He met you in 2011 in Lisbon when you showed him and his wife Lisbon and Jewish places in Lisbon. Arnold Vries has a Vieira family from Amsterdam, a very large family. Did you ever look into those Vieiras, or are there many families with that name?
There are many families with the surname Vieira. I know that in London there are also families in the Jewish community of London that have the surname Vieira, but it is a quite common surname in Portugal.
What does it mean? What does Vieira mean?
Vieira is, do you know that shell? I don't know what is the English name, but that shell that that is the that is the symbol of Santiago.
The clam. And they have clams on their coat of arms.
Yes.
Oh,
A good non-kosher fish.
absolutely. But have you researched the Vieira family of Amsterdam? Because my family's from Amsterdam.
Oh, I've not searched the Vieira family actually. No. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Bob, I believe, Bob asks about business information about business transactions. I believe Portugal must also have many notarial archives.
Yes. This is a kind of documentation that is not already well researched. It's not quite easy to research, and we don't have many. It's not well worked, but it's a documentation that deserves to be explored. Indeed, but I have not worked with this documentation, with the notarial records at the moment. But
I believe there's not
maybe
much
in the future.
online also.
No.
Okay.
And most of it is in the district archives, not in the national archives.
May I come in at this moment? First of all, I think it was a wonderful talk. And
Thank you.
Any consolation, we do have Vieira family in Jamaica, and we do call them the little clams. So that's I can't tell you that you're related. But I think I wanted to share with you and with everybody. What we have done here is we have cataloged all our Jewish graves, and we do have some who have on their gravestones Portuguese. So 18th century Jews did actually sometimes recognize where they came from. And I haven't done the record for your purposes to find out if these people came from Portugal or more than likely came through London.
Yes.
And this would be the way, because you have expressed that too. And that's very much part of the history, but also a significant amount appear to have come from Amsterdam. So Amsterdam was also a major center for those of us our ancestors who came from the escape from Portugal. The other thing which I will share with you, and it came out last year, is we were able, with the work of Professor Stan Mervis, to record all the wills of the 18th century Jamaican Jews. I can't remember exactly, it's I think 400 or 450. Not everybody wrote a will, but we have a significant number of wills, and they create a tremendous amount of information, not only of what they left, but also with who they were related to and where they came from. So it's a book that was published by Yale, and it may be important for you to add it to your collection. You might find interesting information in it. It's beyond my ken because I don't speak Portuguese. But it was a lovely talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And good news, this publication of the wills are good news.
And by the way, I'm from Jamaica, not from anywhere else.
Ali has a question.
Yes, I was wondering if there are any records of the movements of ships from Lisbon to British ports, because, and I'll tell you the context for this, a couple of weeks ago, I did some research in the accounts of Bevis Marks for the years where there was a peak in the mid-1720s, and found specific lists of ships and the captain's names, and also passengers' names for not all of them, but quite a few, for 5 years between 1727 and 1732. And I tried to sort of cross-reference them with the circumcision and marriage records. And I think I found some of the names. So, for example, I found that Francisca da Costa might be Abigail da Costa, and so forth. So, but it would be interesting to find out when, because there aren't dates for the actual voyages, only when the captains were paid by Bevis Marks. And these were particular ships that where Bevis Marks paid for the passage of these Vindos. So I was wondering if it's possible to track the movement of some of these ships whose names we know and their captains' names we know in a certain time frame.
Maybe, because here in Portugal, in the Archive of Lisbon, in the Municipal City Archive of Lisbon, there are a collection of the lists of boats that docked in Lisbon. So maybe if you cross this reference, the lists are not complete. They are the name of the boat, the name of the master, of the captain, and the date and the date. Then, but maybe it could be a hypothesis to cross this reference, maybe.
And do we know which ports that the English ships mostly traveled between Lisbon and England? Was it Bristol or Falmouth?
Falmouth, yeah, yeah, Falmouth.
Those two.
Yes.
Bristol and Falmouth.
No, Falmouth. Bristol, I don't know, but Falmouth, yes, because there was a regular carreira. I don't know how to say in English between Lisbon and Falmouth.
Route.
Packets.
Yes. Yes, packets.
But not to London itself.
The packets was from Lisbon to Falmouth, directly to London. Maybe some boats. I have not researched this problem, but probably.
But again, may I comment? I think that it will be interesting to talk to the British records to see what ships were plying between Portugal and Britain. But the other part of the equation is that a significant number of ships started to ply in the 18th century with the Caribbean because of the growth of the sugar industry. And one of the important ports was, of course, Newport and Providence. So the argument also that Aaron Lopez, who was a major ship owner, had vessels traveling to Jamaica in the 18th century, and that I can assure you I know of specifically. So was he bringing Jews to Jamaica from arriving in America, or was it all sorts of other aspects of trade? It's a really fascinating story as how we moved into the Caribbean and how, because of the major settlements that we had in Curacao and Jamaica and Barbados. And yes, we have evidence that the first 6 Henriqueses that came from London came on the Great Guest in 1668 to Jamaica. And the captain of that was Captain Bernard.
WhatsApp audio.
1 second, I don't know why this is on. And what was interesting was that Captain Bernard eventually migrated to Jamaica and was given a site of land called Bernard's Lodge. So we do know he did exist. I can't tell you that all my family originally started from those 6, but you know, we can't go back exactly to all of them.
There are some questions on Facebook, I believe. David?
Yes, there's a couple. Mike asks whether you found any documents on the Gomes da Costa, and I should say that Ali is going to be talking about the Gomes da Costa in a few weeks. Alexander Baida asks whether you've seen any cases where old Christians were escaping Portugal to join the Jewish community in London.
About Gomes da Costa, I think that there are some Inquisition trials against Gomes da Costa, but it's a family that I have not studied yet. About this is quite interesting. The old Christians that joined the Jewish community. I don't have any evidence, but I have an evidence of Inquisition guard José Moreira, who was suspect of make the communication between prisoners easier when they were arrested. And some years after, he went to London and presented before the Congregation of London to ask their help, because they had helped some of the Portuguese Jews that were then in London. This is quite interesting document that is part of the congregation records.
Do you know which year that was?
What?
What year was that? Do you know?
Oh, I have to check this, but I think that is the 1730s.
Okay, because I found a reference of a bribe being paid to an Inquisition guard. So
okay.
maybe one, I don't know.
And what was the name of the guard?
It didn't say it. Just I'll show you when we're talking afterwards.
Maybe it's the same person.
Maybe, who knows? You mentioned the case of Manuel Lopez Alves and
Yes.
having sort of religious text, which I'm sure I'll be looking at very late tonight. Again, I asked an impossible question before about the Inquisition motivation. The new Christians who are coming to London, do you think most of them were just escaping probable or possible persecution, or that they were coming for religious reasons, or what? And of course, we have to recognize there was a traffic in both directions. Of course, people were also coming back to Portugal, but I have to say, in my own family, I have found before family members were in Amsterdam, I found no indication of any interest in Judaism whatsoever.
This is also a hard question, because it's a difficult question, because, and this is quite visionary in the historiography, because you have some experts that think that these new Christians were not Jews. They didn't have any religious feeling, any religious adherence to Judaism, and this escape from Portugal was only a survival motivation, basically. But then you have other experts that defend that they were almost a great part of them were indeed Jews, and they kept during centuries their Jewish faith in secret. I think that the real answer to this question is in the middle. There are some of them that only escape for survival, to survive to avoid the Inquisition trial, and you have other ones that kept this Jewish adherence in his Jewish feelings in secret. And Manuel Lopes Alves is an example, because he had a prayer book, and the prayer book is annexed to his trial, and he kept did the Jewish prayers by the book. So, and you have some evidence, similar evidence in the Inquisition trials of this kind of a deep connection with Judaism, even in clandestine. Yes.
Yeah.
So.
And you were saying, of course, there was the route from Portugal to London, but do you think ships were stopping off on in Amsterdam on the way? I'm actually trying to work out how members of my own family may have got to Amsterdam. Do you think? I mean, was there a regular? Do you know if there were regular trade routes? You know, were they stopping off in sort of Bordeaux and Bayonne and everywhere along the way, or how was it working?
Most of these fugitives that I have tracked, they escape in packet boats that make this regular travel from Portugal to Falmouth, and others also escape in military vessels. So not so much in trade ships. And I think that they went directly to London, and then after being in London, they went to Amsterdam, went to France, Italy. In some cases, London was just a point of passage, of crossing point.
Again, I think one of the interesting things is that they must have probably left on English ships rather than Portuguese ships. So the argument would be because they would not have been safe on Portuguese ships. So we have a shorter number of examinations. But I wanted to also mention that Daniel Israel Lopez Laguna came to Jamaica. He was born in Portugal in 1563, and he ended up in 1653, and he died, we think, here in 1730. And he, of course, his fame was that he was the major poet of Las Samas, which is a significant contribution to our heritage. So that part of the Laguna family, when you started with it, I said, oh my goodness, we have a connection. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Did you ever try to make a connection between people in England and their history in Portugal through the use of signatures? For instance, this Abraham Mendes Sexas, he signed his ketubot, but he may also have signed Inquisition records. And if you compare his signatures, then maybe you can prove a connection through that.
Yes.
Noah Ramos asks to Ainsley, how do you know the date of birth of Daniel Lopez Laguna?
I didn't read it. It's a guess based on the age when he died.
Okay. Thank you. Have you any information about the occupations of these escapees from the Inquisition? And did they continue their occupation in London?
Yes. Most of them were traders, were merchants, but there are some of them, and a significant number of them that were also physicians. They dedicated to medicine. And this is the two most significant occupations of these Portuguese Jews.
Thank you. And I think that's about it.
Well, I just want to add, since everybody has an ancestor, I just want to add that the Pereira Mendes family, now the ancestors of Rabbi Henry Pereira Mendes, also turned up in Jamaica in the mid-18th century. And I'm privileged to tell you all I'm a descendant. But thank you very much for the wonderful talk.
Bernard, you have a question?
Yes, it's about the physicians. I'm fascinated how many doctors there are right across the board in the Sephardic tree. And I wondered where the physicians in Portugal had studied, whether there were particular centers or what the sort of background of that is, because it's very interesting noting how many people from other countries ended up studying medicine in Padua in Italy. And it looks like more than anywhere else.
They had Jewish mothers.
Yes, a great part of them studied in the University of Coimbra. And the University of Coimbra have the records of all students that studied there. some years ago, I have also researched the background of Lopes Samuda, Isaac Sequeira Samuda, sorry, was Simon Lopes Samuda in Lisbon, and he had studied in the University of Coimbra. He went to London in the 1720s, and he became the first Jew to become member of the Royal Society of London.
What about the de Azevedos? As Ainsley and Ton and David all know, that's part of my heritage. De Azevedo, Cohen de Azevedo.
There are also some new Christians with the Azevedo surname, but Azevedo surname is also a quite current Portuguese surname. So sometimes you have to check if they are new Christians or old Christians and which Azevedo we are talking about. It's easier when we have two surnames, no? So Azevedo is easier to identify.
The Cohen de Azevedos as opposed to the solemn de Azevedos. I know that.
What did they do every day? I mean, did they mix in the not Jewish communities? Did they go out to lunch? Were they eating kosher? Or was it very mixed? Did they quarrel about religion? How many different versions of them were there? Because I've never seen a Jewish community in my life that was just one thing. And I grew up in a Sephardi community in Manchester. Wild. It was wild.
So I'd like to have answers to these questions, but unfortunately, we don't have many documentary evidence about the daily life of these persons.
They didn't keep diaries. They didn't keep diaries or notes or anything. And what were the women up to? Were they just cooking, or were they actually? I mean, because I know there were women who were quite active, but it would be lovely to know about their lives.
Yes.
Including the wild lives of my uncles and aunts, you see. I saw them. Oh, what?
Yes, it will be wonderful if we could find a diary, a journey of these of these shoes. It will be wonderful. Yes.
Thank you.
Ton, do you want to
Yes.
I think this is really wonderful, and I hope that you can come back in a few months again to talk to us. I think there are sources that I never knew existed. I think it's wonderful.
Yes.
Ton, shall we sort of, unless there's any more questions?
Yes. There's one more interesting question. Where does your project go from now? What are your main goals for the near future?
Now I'm trying to explore a little these Portuguese Jews who went from London to colonial America, maybe to New York, Newport, and I'm now trying to find to research a little about these families. This is my focus.
So we lost you for a minute. The Portuguese families who went where?
Oh no, I'm said that now I'm dedicating my research to Portuguese Jews who went from London to colonial America, namely to New York, to Newport. Sorry, I have to here. The battery of my computer is low.
Okay.
Okay. Problem solved.
Okay. Well, Carla, thank you for a very interesting talk. Like David said, we heard about sources that we didn't know about,
Thank you.
also online.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And, indeed, we hope that you will come back in a few months' time, or maybe in a year time, I think this is also about time to say that Sephardic World celebrates its first birthday tomorrow. We exist for a year, and it has been quite a successful year. Many ups, a few downs, a lot of technical problems, but also a lot of interesting speakers, both lay people, people interested in their genealogies, and professional historians like Carla. And it's been quite a ride. And it would not have been possible without our patrons. And if you're not a patron yet, you can still become one. So next week, we will not, no, next week our speaker will be, and David knows his name.
Our speaker next week is, last week I'm afraid I got it wrong. Our speaker next week is Daniel Smith Ramos, who will be talking about Spanish records pre-1750, not Inquisition records. And the weekend after that is Shavuot, so we will be off that weekend. And Carla, just afterwards we'll send you a link and we'll just have a quick sort of follow-up chat, and I can show you that information. Can I just tell everybody that we are trying to copy a lot of to upload a lot of the previous talks to YouTube, to the Sephardic Genealogy channel. If people can subscribe to that channel, it would help us a lot. I'm afraid, as Ton says, we are not the most technical people in the world, but we do our best. So, Ton, to you.
Yes, thank you, Carla, for a great speech. And thanks to our patrons who make all of this possible. And thank you for all those who watched us on Zoom and on Facebook. And hope to see you next week.